Communicative competence. Communicative competence is being able to say the right things the right way at the right time. So competence means you know how to do things. And communicative means communication. Communicative competence is being able to say the right things the right way at the right time. And communicative competence was Delheim's reaction to Noam Chomsky's emphasis on grammar alone. You see, Noam Chomsky, the eminent specialist on language learning, believed that once a learner has acquired the grammar of the target language, then that learner has acquired the language. And Delheims came along and said, no, it's simply not enough to just acquire the grammar. There are so many things that a person learning a language needs to understand, not just grammar. And Delheims coined the term communicative competence. Delheims coined the term communicative competence as being able to say the right things at the right time and in the right way. So for example, in Filipino, we ask, pang ilang presidente si Trump? I spoke uh, to several native speakers, and here are their suggestions. One is, how many presidents before Trump? How many presidents before Trump? And that's that's natural. Okay, like also, if you are falling in line to the ticket counter and you're calling somebody, oh, I'm in the line. There's law. It's long, and then the person would ask, the one calling you would ask, how many people in front of you? How many people in front of you? Or if you're talking about the number of children, your order in the of children in the family, you would say, how many children before you? And you would say, I'm the eldest. I'm the third. You won't say two. You would say, I'm the eldest. I'm the third, something like that. Another person, another American I asked, said that you could ask it this way: which president is Donald Trump? Now that is very, very natural. Which president is Donald Trump? And people would say, he's the 50th president. Okay, that's what we mean by communicative competence. You know what to say, when, and in the right way. Okay, you see, class, as learners of CALP English, of academic English, it's very difficult for us to communicate in an everyday context. So many of us don't know that, how to say that naturally. Of course, we can say it, but not in a natural way, not the way native speakers would say it. Another one, class, another question is, here's another question about communicative competence. Pakibariyahan mo nga ito. How do you say that in English? Could you please break this $100 bill? So bariyahan in English is actually break. Okay, thank you very much. So that is communicative competence, knowing what to say, the right time, and in the right way. And communicative competence involves four things: linguistic competence, sociolinguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. First, communicative competence requires linguistic competence. This means being able to use the structural aspects of language, including pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. So you know how to pronounce words, you know the meaning of words, you know the right grammar, and you know the right vocabulary. That is linguistic competence. Linguistic competence also involves knowing how to use language for a range of different purposes and functions. So later on, we will discuss the functions of a particular utterance. So you use language for different purposes and functions. That's part of linguistic competence. Then we have sociolinguistic competence. Sociolinguistic means social and language, the interaction between language and society. So sociolinguistic competence means being able to use language in a communicative situation based on societal norms and practices. So the way you talk is governed by the culture, it's governed by the society. The way you talk is congruent. It matches the way society expects you to talk. Social linguistic competence also involves knowing how to vary our use of language according to the setting and the participants. Is it an adult? Is it a child? It involves knowing when to use formal and informal speech, or when to use language appropriately for written as opposed to spoken communication. So, once upon a time, I met an American lady who was trying to learn Tagalog. I was 10 years old at that time. She was probably 30 years old. And every time she would speak to me, she would keep on using po and opo. She was 30, I was 10. I was confused when she spoke to me using po and opo. I also had a friend who used sapagkat, datapwat, ngunit, in informal speech. Pupunta sana ako doon, ngunit hindi ako nakarating agad sapagkat so that person learned his Tagalog, his Filipino in textbooks. But then textbooks are used for formal academic context. And it's only later on that she realized that you cannot use sapagkat. You have to use kasi or even dahil, but mostly kasi. And you don't use yung ngunit, you use pero. Pero, which is a Spanish word actually. So social linguistic competence means you talk based on the norms and expectations of society. How loud your voice would be. Could you use gestures? I think in Japan it's frowned upon to use a lot of gestures and to show a lot of emotions in public. Okay, so somebody who has social linguistic competence needs to know how to say things politely. Okay, somebody told me, class, that Filipinas who go to Japan as bar girls are considered rude. You see, class, the language that they learn, the Japanese that they learned in bars. They learned from their customers and their friends. But when you talk in a bar, you don't talk, you're not really expected to be polite. You don't talk in a bar the way you talk in school, in church, or when you talk to your elders. But then the bar girls, they didn't know that. So they use the word forms that are considered impolite. I guess that would include saying wakaranai instead of wakarimasen deshita. when you say, I don't understand, I didn't understand. So wakaranai is much less polite than wakarimasen deshita. Definitely also, when you're in a bar, you don't talk politely. So I just told you about wearing beach clothes for going to the beach and wearing formal clothes on a graduation. You don't wear beach clothes when you go to a graduation. You don't wear formal clothes when you go to the beach. So similarly, you need to talk, to speak in a manner that is acceptable to society. That's sociolinguistic competence. Discourse competence involves being able to use or participate in conversation by combining sentences. So, which sentence comes first? Which sentence comes next? If this is the structure of your sentence, what would be the structure of your next sentence? That's discourse competence. Discourse competence also involves knowing how to produce and understand different types of text. You know how to do narratives. You know how to explain. You know how to do a report. You know how to interview, and you know how to participate in conversations. So that's discourse. That's the idea of discourse. You know how to participate properly by primarily, basically by combining sentences. Okay? Then you have strategic competence. Strategic competence involves knowing how to use strategies for clarification, how to start a discussion, conversation, how do you end a conversation, how do you repair a conversation if there's miscommunication, what do you do? Strategic competence also involves knowing how to participate by turn taking. Do you interrupt other people? Do you wait for your turn? How do you ask for your turn? How would you request to speak? That's strategic competence. Strategic competence involves knowing how to maintain communication despite having limitations in one's language knowledge. So you don't know a particular word, you don't know a particular grammatical structure. So how do you compensate? Maybe you use gestures, you try to say something, just like class when you didn't know how to say, pang ilang presidente si Trump. Class, this is how I would say it in the past. Well, George Washington was the first president. How about Donald Trump? See, class, that's strategic competence. You don't exactly know how to ask the question, pang ilang presidente si Donald Trump? And since you didn't know that, you look for a way, like I did. George Washington was the first president. How about Donald Trump? Or how about when you ask, pang ilan ka sa magkakapatid? So you say, I'm the eldest among my brothers and sisters. How about you? Okay, so that's strategic competence. Okay, so we have four elements of communicative competence. We have linguistic, strategic, social linguistic, and discourse competence. So communicative competence, being able to use language effectively and authentically in different contexts. Of course, as I said, that involves linguistic competence, vocabulary, grammar, punctuation, spelling, when you're writing, syntax, proper sentence structure. And it also involves social linguistic competence. You know how to be polite, you know how to be direct, you know how to be formal, you know the right nonverbal behaviors. You know, class, there are countries in which some hand gestures might be impolite. And you know cultural references, idioms, expressions, background knowledge. You know how to reference ideas in the culture. You know how to adjust depending on the context, depending on the person you're talking to. Adults, children, that's social linguistic competence. Then you also have discourse competence. It involves understanding how ideas are connected through patterns of organization. Do you have compare and contrast? Do you have illustration? Do you have argumentation? Those are patterns of organization. And you know how to use cohesive and transitional devices. You know when to say therefore. You know when to say although, or nevertheless, or in addition, or for example. So those are all part of discourse competence. And finally, you have strategic competence. That's when you know how to use techniques so that you could overcome language gaps, like what I said before about what I did when I didn't know how to ask pang ilang presidente si Donald Trump. And you know how to plan and assess the effectiveness of what you will say. And you become fluent in conversation in that language. And you know how to modify your speech for audience and purpose. That's strategic competence. Okay? So all of these four contribute to what we call communicative competence. Class, this kind of categorization was formulated by authors named Canale and Swain. There are other ways of defining and explaining communicative competence. Another one was given by Lyle Backman, but that's a different discussion. So, in simple terms, we use these four aspects of communicative competence. So, again, communicative competence involves knowing what to say at the right time and in the right way. Okay? Thank you very much.